do is invite Malcolm Jenkins and Chris Long and these other NFL players. Why don't you come to the White House? Let's have a roundtable. Let's have a serious conversation and really talk about how we can work together, because I think President Trump is actually very serious. And I think that'd be a great scene to have these NFL players come with Trump, have a sit down, come up with solutions and work together on them.
And Gianno, I hope that the NFL players don't take a page from the Democrats and rebuff anything that President Trump does. You know, he's already made a couple of these commutations or pardons. If he does more of them, I think they should take that as an olive branch and a transition, not say it's not enough and continue this protest.
Yeah, I hope they don't take a page from some of our most senior black leaders who say, I would refuse to meet with Trump, which is just a disgrace at this point, seriously. Even Van Jones admits that, hey, we need to work with the White House on this. You know, I've met with Senator Chuck Grassley, I've met with Representative Goodlatte on these criminal justice issues. I've met with folks at the White House with regards to this issue. And I think what we really need is they're very serious, and they've been serious for a very long time.
Thank you both very much. Have a great weekend, and thank you at home. Here's Lou.
Good evening, everybody. I'm David Asman. Lou Dobbs has the night off. Our top stories tonight: deadline day for the DOJ, and still the obstruction continues. The Justice Department still hasn't handed over key documents related to the Russia witch hunt, even as Republican lawmakers threaten to hold Deputy AG Rod Rosenstein in contempt. We're going to take up the deep state stonewalling with Tom Fitton of Judicial Watch. Also tonight, President Trump makes an emotional plea for fixing America's broken immigration system, while rhinos and Dems in Congress push for open borders and amnesty.
Where is the media outrage over the catch and release policies that allow deadly drugs to pour into our country? Where is the condemnation of the Democrat sanctuary cities that release violent criminals into our communities and then protect them?
We'll have the very latest on the immigration bill stalled on Capitol Hill with Congressman Keith Rothfuss of Pennsylvania. Plus, the national left-wing media goes fact-free in its coverage of border enforcement, using very misleading imagery to gin up a counterfeit crisis. The Dean, Ed Rollins, weighing in on how the Trump administration can counter the latest liberal lunacy. Our top story tonight is the deadline for the Justice Department to release documents related to the use of sources in the Russia collusion investigation. Chief Intel correspondent Catherine Herridge tells us where things stand.
David, two sources close to the matter tell Fox News the Justice Department significantly ramped up its production of records this week for the three House committees. But a key set of documents about when the Russia case began on July 31st, 2016 was not provided. The congressional committees are expecting a letter from the Justice Department tonight, either asking for more time or explaining why they cannot comply with the outstanding congressional subpoenas. Last Friday, the House Speaker met with the FBI Director, Deputy Attorney General, as well as the three Republican committee chairmen, and went line by line through the outstanding requests. The FBI and Department of Justice were given until last Sunday to hand over records about intelligence, including the use of confidential human sources that kick-started the Russia collusion probe. With that deadline missed and a looming deadline today, at his weekly news conference, the House Speaker said contempt of Congress is on the table.
They've been dragging their feet over the Justice Department to giving Congress. They could have spared the country a whole bunch of drama if they would have complied with these document requests months ago when they were made in the first place.
Multiple sources described last Friday's meeting as rare and impactful because new information came to light that appears to move up the timeline, with the FBI taking significant investigative steps before the Russia case officially opened in July 2016. The sources said Congressman Gowdy's outspoken statements on Fox News Sunday reflected the new information.
There is no ambiguity. The Speaker of the House was really clear. You're going to comply or there's going to be floor action, and I think they got the message.
And floor action would be the
full panoply of constitutional weapons available to the people's house.
House Democrats charged the records request as an effort to help President Trump and undermine the credibility of special counsel Robert Mueller. David?
Catherine Herridge, thank you very much. Joining me now is Judicial Watch President Tom Fitton. Tom, it is now 7:03 p.m. on Friday evening. No sign yet of the documents that Congress has requested. What happens if they don't come through?
Congress will yell more about it, and maybe we'll get some more documents. I think the contempt and the issue of impeachment is a good way to try to escalate things and make it more apparent to the Justice Department that Congress is serious about it. But it's not necessarily going to result in a mass disclosure or an immediate disclosure of information. My concern is that we have this modified limited hangout approach out of the Nixon era by the Justice Department on the Spygate and related scandals. They withheld the Strzok text messages.
Right.
They refused to disclose information about Strzok's removal for 4 months to Congress. He was removed for bias. They didn't tell Congress that. And here we're getting dribs and drabs of information released slowly and in a way to guarantee that Congress doesn't have a full picture by the Justice Department on this core issue as to why, when, and how the targeting of Donald Trump began.
Well, Rod,
by an FBI that was fanatically bending over backwards to protect Hillary Clinton at the same time.
Well, and it's more than the FBI. It's the DOJ and Rod Rosenstein right at the center of it. I mean, I'm getting the sense that Rosenstein really thinks he's above Congress, that he is not. He doesn't have to adhere to rules of oversight, of congressional oversight, which is what this country was founded on.
My impression, David, is that they think that the Mueller investigation can't be touched. And as a result, any documents related to the way it was conceived, however corruptly, they are loath to release to Congress because it's all about protecting this Mueller investigation, which has zero credibility for anyone who spent more than a minute, for instance, looking at the IG report that shows that key investigators involved in its creation and involved in it until just last year were virulently anti-Trump.
Well, thank goodness for two things. One, thank goodness for Judicial Watch, because you guys get a lot of information that they don't want to hand out. And thank goodness for the IG. The Inspector General this week shared with Congress and with the whole nation information that Rod Rosenstein was withholding. Namely, more information about those Peter Strzok, Lisa Page memos and what they were planning to do and what they did do. In one case, switch directly from Hillary Clinton investigation over to the Russia investigation. They also came out with more information about other FBI officials that apparently had just as much anti-Trump bias as Peter Strzok did. And they came out with information, the Inspector General, that is, came out with information about Comey being under investigation. So at least we have information from the Inspector General.
But the question is, what happens next? All of these folks have been implicated in setting up the Mueller investigation. Why is the Mueller investigation sacrosanct and not subject to scrutiny? And just to give you some news here, David, everyone's interested in the FISA court abuses. Congress has asked for the transcripts. We sued the Justice Department for the transcripts, and specifically on the Carter Page issue, where the Clinton DNC dossier was used to justify that FISA warrant improperly. And the Justice Department just told us we don't have any transcripts.
Unbelievable. Unbelievable. Well, again, what we did find out this week was very revealing from the Inspector General. It was a tale of two cities, seeing Rosenstein and Horowitz sitting next to each other because they had very different explanation of what was happening at Justice and FBI. But one thing in specifically that Horowitz said is that the bias exhibited so clearly by Peter Strzok and others at the FBI did translate into policy. Other people tried to deny that was so. But there is a former Attorney General, Mike Mukasey, who was on Fox News yesterday, who talked about how that process worked. Take a listen to what he said, and I want to get your reaction.
That's true. Everybody's got a right to opinions. But when you say that we have to close out this investigation, that's not just an expression of an opinion. That's a statement of what you have to do on your job. And Strzok was one of the supervisors. Lisa Page was counsel to the deputy director of the FBI. These were not street agents.
So you're entitled to your opinion, your political views. You can hate Trump, but you can't allow it to affect your job at the FBI. That's exactly what happened. And they probably changed the investigative course of what the FBI was looking at with regard to Hillary Clinton, moving that investigation over to Russia with all of the false narratives coming out of that, like the Trump dossier.
Peter Strzok was a prime mover in the FBI on the Russia investigation when it came to the dossier, obviously when it came to surveillance. So the idea that his anti-Trump bias, where he was specifically highlighting the role in the investigation, the role of his investigation in stopping Trump, making up for what he allegedly did to maybe make Hillary Clinton's election more challenging. I mean, I don't know how you can separate the two. That's where the IG failed. The facts are there to call into question the Mueller investigation.
Yeah.
He failed to draw the obvious conclusions, and frankly, it's up to Congress, the Justice Department, and the FBI to get on the ball and understand the Mueller investigation is irredeemably tainted and compromised.
Right.
And in the least needs to be paused till we figure out just how much corruption is endemic there.
Exactly.
We shouldn't wait 2 more years for another IG report to tell us what's rather obvious, that the Mueller investigation is biased and compromised.
Well, I'll tell you something else that seems obvious from what Horowitz was saying is that there's not that much of a difference between Peter Strzok and Rod Rosenstein in this particular regard. He is tainted. That we found out this week that there is an investigation, FBI investigation of former FBI Director Jim Comey. There's an investigation ongoing, and considering Rod Rosenstein's participation in the firing of Jim Comey, he has to recuse himself from the Russia investigation. He has to stop his role of being the foreman, if you will, of the Mueller investigation. Don't you agree?
Well, you know, if they were applying the recusal rules evenly, he would. But if they're not, maybe Jeff Sessions should come back in, unrecuse himself, as he should have done a long time ago, and take back control of his Justice Department from the Mueller-Rosenstein team. You know, right now, as far as I'm concerned, Robert Mueller is running the Justice Department with respect to everything related to Russia and congressional oversight, and that's why we're getting the obstruction. And Jeff Sessions has got to come back in and start running things.
Tom Fitton, great to see you, Tom. Thank you very much. Have a good weekend.
Thank you, David.
Appreciate
You
it.
too.
Coming up next, the left-wing national media launching a fake news smear campaign against the Trump administration and its handling of the crisis at the border. Ed Rollins is here to join us next. In fact, she was standing right next to her when this photograph was taken. Now, it's not the first time the left has been caught red-handed spreading disinformation. Last month, multiple Democrats and liberal entertainers retweeted these pictures of detained children. Well, guess what? They were actually taken from 2014 during the Obama administration. It was supposed to be a hit on Trump. And another viral image of a child in a cage spread last week by left-wing activists came from a staged protest in Texas. That is not in a detention center. Joining me now is former Reagan political director, Great America PAC chairman, and Fox Business political analyst Ed Rollins. Ed, it's great to see you.
Thank you.
You know, I remember when Time Magazine, we were talking about Time Magazine. This, first of all, it's just a shadow of its former self, just a couple of dozen pages. But I remember when every single word in this magazine had to be checked, double-checked, triple-checked by editors. Every word had a little red dot above it, had to make sure that even if it was the word the or and, it had to be correct. Nowadays, look at this propaganda. Pure false story, a false narrative put on the cover of Time Magazine.
And totally outrageous. I mean, when you go to the story, I mean, obviously we all get our hearts tugged a little bit when we see kids and what happens to them. But this is all misinformation. And the people taking care of these kids, Department of Human Health and Service, what have you, I mean, they're doing everything they can to deal with a very, very significant problem. This kid's mother, the father basically has come forward saying he didn't want her to come. She had been in the country, tried to sneak in once before and got caught. She at $6,000, she paid a coyote to bring them up.
Right.
I mean, it's just, and then to basically make this poor little child a victim like this to try and get at the president.
But there are other examples. There are a half a dozen other examples that I could just reel off right now. And it makes me wonder whether this second front, this is, after all, is the second front against Donald Trump by his enemies. The first front was Russia. That's falling apart, as we discussed in the first block. So then they turned to immigration, and this is now falling apart. I'm just wondering if, in fact, the whole second front, this move to make immigration the key issue of the election, is going to be a total disaster for Democrats.
It certainly could be. The problem is you've now created an emotional issue, and so you need intellectual debate on this. This is a very significant need in this country to have a serious discussion of debate and where we move on immigration And we need a comprehensive, long-term immigration, which we're obviously not going to get in the next few weeks before.
But you did have something happening this week, and that is an executive action taken by the president to try to do what he could in those cases where there were legitimate issues about separating families, and there are some legitimate issues about that. He went ahead with an executive action. Now, what that does is interesting. It keeps families together, but it results in the incarceration, not necessarily in the jail cell, but the incarceration of children, which is something that the original ruling by a judge was meant to prevent.
And you have a very difficult time now if these judges basically say, well, in 20 days are up, you got to let them go. Where do you let them go? If the parents are in the judicial system because they've tried to get through and they're not going to probably get through, what do you do with them? You just kick them out the door?
But isn't that the objective, after all, of the left? That's right. Rush Limbaugh talked about that this week, the fact that the real objective of the left is now totally transparent because of the failure of the propaganda. That is catch and release. They want to let not only the children go, but also the parents. They want to let everybody go and be free to do what they want to do in our country.
I watched Wolf Blitzer earlier this week do an interview in which he basically said, this is like a misdemeanor. Give them a traffic ticket. Let them come in the country. You know, if you're going to have an open border, then you're going to have all kinds of problems. And you can't, no country in the world has open borders. And I think this president obviously is doing the right thing. It's hard. He's going to get beat and battered, but he doesn't care. He's going to do the right thing.
Yeah, but I wonder if he'll get beaten in November. The Rasmussen poll came out this week. 54% of Americans blame the parents of these children. They don't blame the Trump administration for what is happening.
Well, it is the parents. The parents are bringing these kids and or sometimes not even the parents. They're sending the kids on the trail. But the idea that you're coming, as this mother did, with $6,000 to pay a coyote to get them up the trail, $6,000, they could have lived pretty effectively probably in their home country. And at the end of the day, this is just an outrage. And what they've done is they want to create an emotional issue that people get their hearts tugged, and they don't want to deal with the very serious problem of immigration in this country.
So, quick answer. Come November, will immigration be a plus or a negative for the GOP and the president in particular?
I think it'll be a plus. I think we're trying to resolve it. The Democrats clearly are not going to participate in any way, shape, or form. I don't think it goes any further. I mean, I think the immigration bill, for all practical purposes, is dead. But I think members have to go back and argue what they want to do and what they think the problem is. And if they do that, they're going to be okay. If they don't do that, and the president's promised to build a wall, vast majority of Americans today see that as the only remedy on that southern border.
Ed Rollins, good to see you, my friend. Thank you very much.
Nice weekend.
And be sure to vote in tonight's poll. Do you think their deceptive coverage of child detainees has exposed members of the national left-wing media as mere shills for the pro-amnesty open border agenda? Cast your vote on Twitter at Lou Dobbs. And follow Lou on Twitter at Lou Dobbs, like Lou on Facebook, and follow him on Instagram at Lou Dobbs Tonight. Coming up next, New York's left-wing candidate for governor comparing our brave ICE agents to terrorists. Former Secret Service agent Dan Bongino responding next. You don't want to miss this. For Congress on June 27th at 10 a.m. The committee issuing the subpoena after Strzok failed to commit to a specific date to testify. That is going to be interesting. Meanwhile, New York gubernatorial candidate and former Sex and the City star Cynthia Nixon yesterday called the U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, or ICE, a terrorist organization and called for its abolition. Nixon says ICE has strayed from its mission to keep Americans safe and is terrorizing people coming to this country. Joining me now is former NYPD officer and former Secret Service agent Dan Bongino. Dan, I've got a list of a couple of dozen ICE agents here who died in the line of duty. And I'm just going to read through some of their last names. Martinez, Morales, Gomez, Alvarez, Barraza, Vega, Ramirez, Dominguez, Cavazos, Rojas. I could go on. These are supposedly the anti-Latino terrorists that Cynthia Nixon was talking about.
David, this is, listen, I'm just being candid with you. This is one of the most troubling times I've ever seen in my, 2 decades heavily involved in politics. I've never seen anything like this. People make statements like this, David, that I think you and I both understand. 20 or 30 years ago, you would never be accepted again in polite company on either side of the political aisle if you were to call law-abiding, patriotic law enforcement officers for the United States who are employed by ICE terrorists. You would be humiliated. You would never be allowed in polite company again. Now, You run for governor under the banner of the Democrat Party, and people almost celebrate these absurd comments. Did you see her appearance on The View, where she made these hostile statements, and nobody, people in the crowd were like clapping as if it was funny, David? I have never seen anything like this.
Well, I trust that a lot of the audience is just plain old ignorant. But Lord knows she's ignorant, but she is so nasty. And the fact that the families of these agents, these Hispanic agents, are now have to endure, not only did they have to endure the murder and death of their families and loved ones who put their lives on the line and lost their lives as a result of fighting, but to add insult to injury, to suggest that these Hispanic officers were anti-Hispanic. It's nuts.
You know, David, my wife's maiden name is Martinez de Ortiz. That's not Irish. I know you can figure that out. Liberals may have a tough time with that. My wife's a first-generation immigrant from Colombia. It's amazing how this collective identity thing liberals want to impose on us works. If you are a conservative, then you are a racist, a xenophobe, whatever it may be. And it defies common sense. But do you understand that what they're doing here is very tactical, David? They want to dehumanize you so that they win the argument before it starts. Because if the debate actually starts, they'll lose on the facts. So by getting people to believe that we're all racists and xenophobes or whatever, even those Hispanic, patriotic law enforcement officers that died in the line of duty, then there is no argument. They can avoid the uncomfortable facts that would slam them in the face.
You know, at the risk of getting too personal, I gotta tell. I married a Nicaraguan immigrant who came here with her 7-year-old son who didn't speak a word of Spanish. He had a tough time adjusting, but we did it legally. It took a couple of years before they were able to get the green card and finally get citizenship. He's now a U.S. Marine. Again, it takes time. It takes heartache, sometimes heartbreak when an immigrant comes to this country. But for somebody like you or like me who've helped immigrants come from places in Central America, it's an insult to the people who do it legally and to the people who go out of their way to help the folks from Central America, what some of these people like Nixon are doing.
David, I'm so glad you said that, and I know how proud you are of that. And you're damn right. I mean, excuse my language. But my wife and I spent 7 years going through this process, and probably close to $15,000. You know what, David? I get it. The legal immigration process is a mess, and there's a fair argument to be had. You know why I know that? I went through it.
Yeah,
so did you. It stinks. But what do you say to people like your spouse and mine who sat there patiently and waited in line to raise their right hand while everybody else gets to jump the line and gets the exact same benefit? That's not equal application of the rule of law. I'm sorry, that's not fair. What about their stories? Do they matter, or do they get lost in this whole thing?
And again, I want to bring it back to the ICE agents, because for people who put their lives on the line, I'm concerned, and maybe you could assuage my concern, but I am concerned that people would be much less likely to volunteer for these jobs that are so dangerous in and of themselves and that now have to deal with ridicule of idiots like Cynthia Nixon.
You know, I wish I could put you at ease here, but I can't. I mean, here's the problem, David. You know, we view liberals as generally, well, me, I mean, as a conservative, as people with generally bad ideas, and I'd like to debate those ideas. The problem we're having now is the other side, not all Democrats, I'm not going to do what they do to us, but a good portion of the radical far left, they don't view us as people with bad ideas. They view us as bad people with ideas. That's far different. And they lump in ICE and law enforcement with that. You know, think about it, David. The Father's Day just passed.
Yeah.
That Officer Morales you just mentioned, this patriot who died in the line of duty, I've never met the man in my life. And you know what? I never will, because he's not here. And at that Father's Day dinner table, some kid was missing his parents. These are the same people Cynthia Nixon calls terrorists. I mean, really disgusting, horrible stuff. She should be horrified. She should drop out of the race tomorrow.
These are heroes to the nation. They're heroes not only to the nation, but to their families that she has just insulted. And there is no forgiveness for that. Dan Bongino, thank you for your service, sir. Appreciate you coming on.
Yes, sir. Thanks, David.
Coming up next, President Trump and angel families unite, demanding Congress fix our broken immigration laws. We take up the immigration battle with Congressman Keith Rothfus. He's here next. Hands of illegal immigrants. Together, they demanded Congress take action to fix our broken immigration system. Take a listen.
These are the stories that Democrats and people that are weak on immigration, they don't want to discuss, they don't want to hear, they don't want to see, they don't want to talk about.
63,000 Americans since 9/11 have been killed by illegal aliens. This isn't a problem that's going away. It's getting bigger.
Remember when you go home and hug your kids? That there are many of us, thousands of us, who don't get to do that anymore. And let's work together and get this done. All politicians, I don't care what side you're on. You don't want your child in a casket or in an urn. So get it together, for God's sake, for this country, for our citizens.
She was holding an urn, which was all that remained of her son. Joining me now is Pennsylvania Congressman Keith Rothfus. He serves on the House Judiciary Committee and the House Committee on Financial Services. Congressman, this is one of the most powerful meetings at the White House I have ever seen. There was nothing fake at all about this. I'm wondering what you thought about it.
Roger that. Well, whenever you're talking with families who have lost a family member in any situation, but particularly when somebody's been killed or murdered, and then you look at the situation that led to that murder and find out that there was an illegal alien involved, you start asking a lot of questions, or that family can start asking a lot of questions. How did that person get here? How did that person stay here? Particularly, some of these folks do have records. Look, we have to fix our immigration system. We have to fix our border. We have to secure the border. That has been an issue for not just 1 year or 2 years,
That's
but
right.
for a very long time. We have a proposal that we voted on yesterday. Unfortunately, came up short. Not a single Democrat voted for that bill that would have secured the border and provided a legal status for certain DACA recipients, or for all the DACA recipients, that is. So again, it is past time to secure this border. We are going to continue to do this until we get the job done. The president campaigned on this. This is a big issue. The people want that border secured.
And it's also not just important for the safety of Americans, of people who live here now. It's important for the safety of a lot of those illegal immigrants, particularly the children, thousands of whom, tens of thousands of whom, are sent across the border alone. I mean, completely susceptible to the worst kind of criminal predators, those coyotes who prey particularly on the young girls.
They are exploited. They are exploited by evil organizations. The cartels have wreaked havoc in Mexico. Over 130,000 people have been murdered over the last 10 years. Those same cartels are responsible for the poison that's coming into this country, the poison that's known as heroin, that's killing people here in western Pennsylvania. That's another reason we have to secure that border. The bill that we voted on yesterday would dramatically increase resources to make sure the ports of entry along the southern border, those places where the cars are coming in, that we have more people on that can be doing the inspections, more equipment to be doing the inspections. We should be inspecting every single vehicle coming into this country, because that's where the poison is coming in. And if that's not a reason for somebody to step up and vote, yes, I'm going to secure that border, I think the Democrats, frankly, have a lot of explaining to do. Why they want to have an open, porous
frankly,
border.
Congressman, it's not just the Democrats. Some Republicans have a lot of explaining to do as well, because you guys did put together, the Freedom Caucus put together a bill that it didn't almost pass, but it got a lot more votes, let me put it that way, than many people expected. You got over 190 votes.
This is much, much broader than the Freedom Caucus. You saw a broad coalition of our conference.
Well, clearly, because they're more than 190 is a huge amount. It's far beyond the Freedom Caucus. But why didn't you get the support from the Speaker? Why didn't the Speaker do more? And is it possible, is it conceivable that in the coming week or weeks you could add to this bill enough sweeteners, if you will, to bring enough people to pass it?
Well, that's the hope. You know, we had a conference last night. We pulled together. We regrouped after that vote. There are some folks who have additional concerns about this new bill that we are looking at. I'm still taking a look at it. Again, I'm looking at it from the perspective of I want that border secure. I want to be addressing the problems. There are some good points in this piece of legislation we're taking a look at. Ending the diversity lottery, for example. Taking a look at the asylum situation. This situation where we have people coming in to the country and abusing the asylum system, to be able to tighten up what's happening with the asylum, and making sure it also addresses the issue of the children being separated from their parents when they come here. Both bills, the one we voted on yesterday, the one we're taking a look at right now, addresses that very important issue.
Well, as you well know, the president himself tweeted out this morning that maybe it's better not to pass anything, considering the toxic environment that we're in. I mean, we were talking earlier about the Time magazine cover and other forms of propaganda that just make kind of meaningful, honest debate almost impossible in this country. He suggests that we wait until after the election. I'll read the tweet, which I'm sure you're familiar with. Republicans should stop wasting their time on immigration until after we elect more senators and congressmen and women in November. Democrats are just playing games. They have no intention of doing anything to solve this decades-old problem. We can pass great legislation after the red wave. What do you think?
Every day that that border remains open is another day that the poison that's killing people in western Pennsylvania can come in. It's not acceptable. You know, I was talking with one of my colleagues from across the aisle yesterday, and I'm not going to say who it was, but expressing frustration with the division in Washington, D.C. generally. And it's unfortunate that you can't have Democrats coming to vote on a significant piece of legislation. This has not always been the case. You take a look at the Reagan economic recovery. We had broad Democrat support. When you're moving major pieces of legislation, it would be very helpful if some on the other side of the aisle would just step back, take a look, and see the good that was in that bill.
You know, they have an expression that nothing concentrates the mind, and I won't say the end of the original one, but in this case, I would say then an election defeat. And if, in fact, there's no blue wave in November, if, in fact, the Democrats are defeated significantly in November, that might bring them to the table more than they would be likely to do so now. Quick last word. Go ahead.
You think they might have learned in 2016 with the stunning upset victory of President Trump, and you have the coastal elites totally missing what's going on in the interior part of the country, and this ties into so many different issues, including what we're doing right now, taking a look at how the FBI conducted the Clinton email investigation and the current investigation. When you have a guy like Peter Strzok talking about Trump voters, that he can smell them at a Walmart in Virginia, the kind of contempt that these elites have for everyday Americans is really shocking.
It sure is. Congressman, thank you very much for being here. Thank you. Have a good weekend.
Thank you.
Keith Rothfuss, we appreciate it. And be sure to vote in tonight's poll. Do you think their deceptive coverage of child detainees has exposed members of the media as mere shills for the pro-amnesty open border agenda? Cast your vote on Twitter @LouDobbs. Coming up next, President Trump threatening to issue a new round of tariffs against the EU as he fights for fair and reciprocal trade deals. We have a full report coming up. President Trump is threatening a 20% tariff on vehicles assembled in the European Union. On the same day, EU tariffs on $3.4 billion in U.S. goods took effect. Deidre Bolton of Fox Business Network joins us now from New York with an update.
Some strategists say massive tariffs on European car makers could cause economic chaos. Here's the president's tweet from earlier today. Based on the tariffs and trade barriers long placed on the U.S. and its great companies and workers by the European Union, if these tariffs and barriers are not soon broken down and removed, we will be placing a 20% tariff on all of their cars coming into the U.S. Build them here. Ford and GM fell right away, as did European auto stocks. Economists say it's complicated to put tariffs on BMW and Mercedes-Benz. Both have a huge presence in the U.S. In September, the parent of Mercedes announced a $1 billion investment in its Alabama plant. The Peterson Institute says a 25% tariff on imported autos would result in 195,000 lost U.S. auto worker jobs. The U.S. and the EU are already in a trade spat. The EU announced a 25% tariff on American goods, motorcycles, steel, bourbon, jeans, in retaliation for U.S. tariffs on European steel and aluminum. Trade tensions were the clear driver of market activity all week. Starting on Monday, President Trump asked his administration to identify $200 billion worth of Chinese goods for additional tariffs at a rate of 10%. Beijing stated it would respond in kind. Trade-sensitive stocks were lower for most of the 5 days. Boeing, Caterpillar, United Technologies, Dow, DuPont, GE, all examples. China's stock market fell too. The Shanghai Composite hit a 2-year low. Sources telling us that some at the White House are trying to restart talks with China to avoid a full-blown trade war. Most say investors can manage trade tensions, but not trade wars. David?
Deidre Bolton, thank you very much. On Wall Street, stocks closed mixed to end the week. The Dow gained 119 points. The S&P up 5, the NASDAQ lost 20. Volume on the big board, 5 billion shares. That was heavy. The Dow losing 2% this week. The S&P and NASDAQ down nearly 1%. And a reminder to listen to Lou's reports 3 times a day, coast to coast, on the Salem Radio Network. Coming up next, ABC announces it will bring back TV show Roseanne without its Trump-supporting lead star, Nick Adams, and Tammy Bruce joining us coming next. Well, ABC is bringing Roseanne back to life, but without Roseanne this time. The company announces a spinoff. It's called The Connors, featuring the rest of the family. 10 new episodes of the show will premiere in the fall. Joining me now is Tammy Bruce, Washington Times columnist, president of Independent Women's Voice, and a Fox Business contributor, and Nick Adams, conservative commentator and executive director of the Foundation for Liberty and American Greatness. Tammy, is anybody going to watch Roseanne without Roseanne?
You know, from my radio audience, they weren't interested. And I think that this is an interesting point of view in that, look, I found, and I've been critical of Roseanne in the past. I mean, she's a vulgarian, effectively.
Sure.
You know what you're getting with her.
Yep.
And yet she was really the only likable, except maybe for Dan, she was really the most likable character. And so my audience is, you're thinking about, well, why would we watch that? And then every time you see it, it'll be a reminder about what happened. And these are individuals, and look, what she had tweeted was awful. And yet I found her apology to be quite genuine. But everybody who had been making a lot of money for years, the first series and then the second one, really just threw her under the bus. And now they're having this new show. She's been generous. She's removed herself, apparently, from the financial end of things because she was the creator of those characters and of the program. So she wants those people to work. But I think that they're going to find that the reaction is going to be very different.
Well,
the reception will be different.
I hope for their sake that it succeeds. I don't want any show that to put people out of work. But, Nick, the hypocrisy has to be stated here, going beyond Roseanne itself. This is the week that Peter Fonda sent out a tweet in which he suggested that the 11-year-old son of the President of the United States be kidnapped and forcibly raped. I mean, this is extraordinary. Now, not only did he not lose his Twitter account, but he didn't lose his contract with Sony, which has a deal apparently for a picture with Mr. Peter Fonda. You got to approach the hypocrisy of this when you compare that to what happened to Roseanne.
David, the double standards are clear and they're unambiguous. There's one rule for the left and there's one rule for everybody else. And that's what we saw this week with Peter Fonda. His comments were beyond reprehensible. Words can't even do justice to the disgrace that they were and that his tweet was. But this is what we see. We see hypocrisy day in, day out. At least Roseanne owned up to her mistakes. She did apologise genuinely, as Tammy points out. I happen to agree with Tammy. The feeling that I've got is that this is going to be a big flop. I don't think that ABC are going to get what they want out of this. And really, it's very hard to see how ABC is going to win from any of this idea of a spin-off.
Well, Tammy, we not only have the hypocrisy of comparing what happened to Roseanne and what happened to Peter Fonda, we also have out-and-out lies in the press about what's happening with immigration. We have the comments of Cynthia Nixon. I think we've reached a point where the absurdity and the at the very least misstatements, if not out-and-out lies, have just accumulated to the point where the liberal left is not believed by the general public. What do you think?
Well, that's it. And this is why a lot of people are talking about how when Peter Fonda does what he does, people on the left are saying, stop it, because this doesn't help. And I think that this began, and you see this more of an increase in this mob mentality, this kind of hysteria, when they realized that the numbers for November were not so good. When California didn't go the way they expected, the president's approval numbers remain in the high 40s, sometimes move over into the 50s. That they are being rejected. And that was this.
You think, by the way, so what you're saying is all of this stuff, the accumulation of all this stuff, the lies about the immigrants, et cetera, that is going to lead to a election defeat in November.
Well, they were already headed there. This is a result of that. This is a result of their panic of seeing that nothing they've done has worked. But I would also say that it's a distraction. The border argument came out on the separated families on the day of the IG report. then you had the incredible success with
Right.
North Korea. You have the economy. So this is also the using of children effectively as a distraction, as chits, to try to get a political edge, which in and of itself is obscene.
Nick, what about Republicans? As I mentioned to the congressman, there was this tussle between Paul Ryan and Mark Meadows from the Freedom Caucus over the issue of what kind of bill would be put forward. There's still a lot of people in the Republican Party that hesitate to give full support to President Trump. Are they going to get their act together? Because it's not President Trump is not running in November. The Congress is.
From your lips to God's ears. Look, David, the Republicans have been very